vision and his thorn. I must go on boasting, although there is nothing to be gained. I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise. He heard inexpressible things, things that man is not permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weakness. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say. To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and in difficulties. For where I am weak, then I am strong. It's the word of God for the people of God. Praise be to God. I said that was near and dear to my heart because I resembled Paul many years ago. I thought I was on top of the world and I relied on my own strengths. I thought that I was going to conquer the world and I didn't need Christ in my life. So the title of this week's talk is The Problem with Being a Perfect 10. A college recruiter interviewed a high school basketball star. The recruiter said, I hear you're pretty good. The best there is, the player replied. I averaged 45 points per game. I was the best rebounder in my high school. And I led our team to 3 undefeated seasons and 3 state championships. That's incredible, said the recruiter. But tell me, do you have any weaknesses? Well, said the youngster sheepishly, I do have a tendency to exaggerate. We all have weaknesses, don't we? There are no perfect 10s in this world. That may be a difficult thing for some of us to admit. It was for me. There are no perfect 10s in this world. For example, 90% of men rank themselves above average in athletic ability. Men sometimes exaggerate, don't they? Some of us are legends in our own minds. We all have our weaknesses. Some of our weaknesses are physical. Some are mental. Some are moral. Some of those weaknesses have to do with our work. Some with our family life. Some with our relationship with Christ. Some of us, for example, have short tempers. Others of us lack diplomacy. Some of us are too proud. Others of us lack backbone. Folks, there are no perfect 10s in this world. And maybe that's just as well. St. Paul had his weaknesses. One in particular caused him much heartache. We don't know for certain what it was. He called it his thorn in the flesh. Some have suggested that St. Paul suffered from epileptic seizures. If so, he was in good company. Two of the most powerful men who ever lived, Julius Caesar and Napoleon, were epileptics, as have been many other great individuals that followed them. In St. Paul's day, there was no Dilantin or phenobarbital to control seizures. If that was his thorn, he was pretty much stuck with it. St. Paul also prayed that God would deliver him from his affliction. 3 times he beseeched God about this matter. What was God's answer to him? He said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." In other words, God seemed to be saying to Paul, "Trust me, Paul. I will take care of you. But I can use your weakness to demonstrate my power." We can learn from Paul's experience, can't we? Paul not only learned to accept his thorn, he even began to boast about his weaknesses in order to show the power of Christ. Our weakness can become our strength as well. Some of us may even learn to rejoice that we're not a perfect 10. First of all, our weakness can become our strengths if they cause us to grow. George Reedy was President Lyndon Johnson's press secretary. It was Reedy who convinced Johnson he should never have assistants who were under 40 years of age and who hadn't suffered any major disappointment in their lives. Without that maturity and without that disappointment, Reedy felt such people thrust into these positions of power would come to think of themselves as little tin guys. That is true. Too much early success in life has a tendency to spoil us. It did me. We begin to think of ourselves as clever, as smart, as not needing God in our life. We begin to rely on our ability rather than our hard work and Jesus. Worse yet, we begin to rely on ourselves more so than we do God, if we rely on God at all. Everyone who makes a major contribution to life knows what it is to have failures. Woody Allen, for instance, that witty man who has produced so many classic films, flunked motion picture production at the City College of New York. Leon Uris, writer of one of the most popular novels of the century called Exodus, failed English 3 times in high school. Everyone who makes a major contribution to life knows what it is to have failures indeed. Those early failures can be a major contributor to later successes. The late Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir once said, she realized that she was not beautiful, but that her lack of beauty was a blessing in disguise, since it forced her to develop her inner resources. As someone has said, our disappointments are His appointments. By God's grace, painful experiences or situations can help us to grow. John Kellinger once told a moving story about a couple whose newborn son was mentally retarded. They were crushed, of course. Still, they loved him as they would any of their other children. They built a bedroom with glass walls so that wherever they were in the house, they could keep able to keep an eye on him. For 17 years, the mother slept next to the boy with her hand next to his heart. If I never started having trouble breathing, or if he ever started having trouble breathing or seeing, she would be able to wake up and give him artificial respiration. For 17 years, they lived this way. One sad day, however, a neighbor's girl fell from a tree and hurt her arm. The mother left her son to rush the girl to the hospital. As she was standing in the emergency room of the hospital with the little girl, her husband came in carrying the body of her son. He had died while she was at the hospital. His father vainly had tried to revive him, but he could not. As the boy lay before them in peace, the parents both wept. But then they gave thanks to God for the gift of their son. For his mother said, "He taught us how to love." Our weaknesses can become strength if they help us to grow. The second thing is, they can also become strengths if they make us more determined. Newspaper columnist George Lagetz once told the story of a young doctor who delivered a baby into a poverty-stricken family in Montana. The child had one cruelly deformed leg. He also had difficulty breathing. The other children will call him Limpy, the doctor thought. His life would be miserable. If I don't do something for his breathing, he will die. Wouldn't that be better, he thought? Then he remembered his Hippocratic oath and began blowing into the baby's mouth. Soon the child's lungs were actually acting normally, and he gave his first cry. Several years later, the doctor's daughter and son-in-law were killed in an auto accident. The doctor's 10-year-old granddaughter was left an orphan. The doctor adopted her and took her in. One day the child was stricken with a crippling and incurable condition, they thought. The doctor learned that there was a young doctor in the Midwest who had been getting excellent results in the treatment of this particular disease. So he took his granddaughter to see the doctor. The young physician was also lame. He was the deformed baby into whose mouth the older doctor had breathed 35 years before. Because of his own infirmity, the young doctor had specialized in the crippling disease. The treatment on the older doctor's grandchild was successful, and the little girl was returned to normal health. It is not rare at all that a doctor with a deformed leg should specialize in crippling diseases and even becomes a star in his field. Such things happen all the time. When a person has an area of weakness, they will often work so hard to overcome their weakness that it becomes a tremendous asset. Some of the most eloquent orators and actors who have ever lived started out with severe speech defects. We are told, for example, that Winston Churchill had such a congenital lisp and stutter that doctors advised him against entering any occupation in which speaking was an important part. Yet he became the most influential speaker of our century. One of the most beautiful speaking voices on stage in screen today is that of James Earl Jones. But did you know that Jones has long battled a severe stuttering problem? From age 9 until his mid-teens, he had to communicate with teachers and classmates by handwritten notes. A high school teacher gave him the help that he needed, but he still struggles with this problem to this day. Yet there is no finer speaking voice than his. He was listed recently among the 10 actors with the most beautiful speaking voice. We can do that too. We can allow our weaknesses to increase our determination to succeed. Another thing about our weaknesses is that they can also become a strength if it helps us to innovate. Sometimes what seems a weakness is only a signal that we are pursuing the wrong trail. finds in literature appears in the opening paragraph of A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh. Here's Edward Bear coming downstairs now, bump, 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 on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming down the stairs. Sometimes he feels that there really is another way. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If you keep bumping your head coming down the stairs, maybe it's time you stop for a moment and think if there's another way. If there's another way that it might be done. Sometimes our so-called weaknesses are simply warning signs to us that we are on the wrong road. It was for me. Eli Wiesel once noted that according to Jewish tradition, creation did not end with man. It began with him. When he created man, God gave him a secret, and the secret was not how to begin, but how to begin again. In other words, it is not given to man to begin. That privilege is God's alone. But it is given to man to begin again. Some of us need to begin again, don't we? That was true of that noble patriot and orator, Patrick Henry. For years of his life, he was a miserable failure. He and his brother opened a store, but it failed. Next, Patrick's father-in-law set him up in farming. Patrick was given 300 acres, a house, and 6 slaves. Even with that start, though, Patrick couldn't make it as a farmer. Finally, on the advice of friends, Patrick turned to law. He was a natural persuader and a captivating orator. As a lawyer, Patrick was an instant success. Further, he was exactly the voice that was needed to launch the colonies toward the break with England. Patrick Henry was not a failure. He was simply in the wrong field for much of his life. What may seem to be weakness under certain circumstances may be just warning signs that we need to start anew. We need to begin again. Finally, our weaknesses may become strengths if they remind us of our dependence on God. I can just hear St. Paul boasting against you, saying things like, "Look at me," he would say. "I once persecuted the church. Look at me, a man who has to battle this humiliating affliction, this thorn in my flesh. Yet Christ has used me to plant churches all over the known world." Paul was a man of tremendous intellect. He was also a man of unquestionable persuasive powers. Perhaps if it had not been for this thorn in his flesh, he would have leaned upon his own ability rather than the power of God working through him. Do many of us do that? I did for many years. And you know, I would never have heard the name of Paul had I not gotten into the Bible. His weakness became his strength. His scar became his star. His hurt became his halo. And the same thing can happen to us. If our weaknesses help us to grow, if our weaknesses make us more determined to succeed, if our weaknesses cause us to try new things, and if our weaknesses cause us to rely on God. Are you relying on God today?